Welcome to the latest episode of Miami Herald's Dolphins in Depth podcast. I'm your host, Miami Herald columnist Omar Kelly. We are inching closer and closer to the start of training camp. Rookies report on the 16th, and reporting right now is Miami Dolphins' Barry Jackson, man of many expertise. I borrowed him a little bit from his Heat coverage. I know you're a little disappointed that it hasn't been more active from a Heat standpoint, Barry. But, I mean, do you not trust Pat Riley enough to know that he's eventually going to figure out a way to get it done?
I do trust him. What's been the incredible transformation in the market, Omar, is how we used to see Riley be the one to make all of these bold moves. Alonzo Mourning, Tim Hardaway, Shaquille O'Neal, the big three. And now Chris Greer is the one, plus the Panthers GM Bill Zito. But Greer is the one attracting all the neon names, the Jalen Ramseys, Tyreek Hills. It's just incredible to see that shift from Riley to Greer. Now, I know it hasn't resulted in any playoff wins yet for Miami, but at least it's made them relevant and interesting.
Yeah, but you know what? I think the apron, the salary cap apron, the NFL has a very different business model than the NBA. And I continue to make this point to people. You know, when you have dead cap, you're not paying it to anybody. It's not like a luxury tax like the NBA or other sports. That's just money that the owner's keeping in his pocket because he's already paid it. It's subterfuge. And so there's no. Now, you can't go over the cap in the NFL, but you can live off credit card, which is what the Dolphins are doing. But now the business model of the NBA has sort of changed the way that the Heat does business. Isn't that correct?
No question about it. And also, one difference from the NFL is you can restructure contracts, of course, in the NFL. You can't in the NBA. So you can't go to an overpaid player in the NBA and say, we're going to cut you. Or the other alternative would be changing your contract. That's just not permitted in the NBA. All contracts are guaranteed for any player worth his salt, unlike the NFL. And I think what's going on with the NBA is there's such punitive penalties and consequences, such as not being able to trade future first-round picks if you go over a certain salary level. So they've made it much more difficult for teams and also, I think, more unpleasant for fans. That's why I like the NFL's cap better, Omar, because at least there you can manipulate it. If you have smart people in your front office, there are ways around it to, as we would say, kick money down the road. So that's why even if you're in cap hell in the NFL, you can still escape it. You can go from cap hell to cap heck, right? And survive it and still be able to add good players. Isn't it funny that the Dolphins entered this offseason a ton over the salary cap? And my goodness, look at all the players they've added, right?
True. They've added a ton of players, and we'll get into that on this episode. And in fact, I think that they've upgraded a lot of positions. During your vacation, I discussed a lot of that with Alan Papard. I definitely want to get your take on some of that as well. But to challenge you a little bit, I don't like the NFL's business model, even though they're clearly the juggernaut of all the professional sports. They make the most money. They shake down the most television networks. Their ratings are superpower ratings compared to what the NBA or any other sports league can offer. The guaranteed contracts, the fake money, the consistent shaking down of veterans. I hate the business model, which is why it's so important when a player has the leverage and is in position to ensure that he gets his guaranteed money, like a Tyreek Hill, who this is the last year of his guaranteed money. Usually players do not play without the next year's contract being guaranteed because teams can shake them down or teams can leverage them, which is why I think I hate it for the players because the new CBA was supposed to take care of the middle class. And while the minimum salaries have raised significantly, that's the minimum salaries. That's the cheap players. And every team is built on the same system where there are 8 players who are making all the money and then everybody else making minimum wage. And I think that that's very disappointing from the business model standpoint. But, we'll just continue to give quarterbacks $50 million contracts, Barry, and everybody will be happy, I guess.
I just can't believe that no NFL union leader has ever been able to get any concessions with regard to guaranteeing money. Because if there's any pro sport where players deserve guaranteed contracts, where they put their body at risk every week, it's the NFL. And it stuns me that we're sitting here in 2024 and there's still no consistent guaranteed contracts for NFL players. If I were the new union director, I would say, you want an 18th game? How about you guarantee every player's contract at 75% throughout the terms of the deal, not just the first year, but if you're going to give them a 3-year deal, 75% of that money is guaranteed. No way the owners would accept that. But at some point, doesn't some union director have to put his foot in the sand and say, this has to be done? This is inherently unfair and it's different from every other.
Hold on. No. The only reason, and I've done a substantial amount of research, the only reason it's different from every other sport, it's not in the NBA contract or Major League Baseball contract or NHL contracts that contracts are guaranteed. It is just the culture of the sports. The agents would not allow it. It's no right. In no language. It just became over time, this is how we're doing business, whereas the NFL has not gotten to that point. And I've been doing this for over a decade now, where even the highest paid elite players, Kirk Cousins and Deshaun Watson were the two players who challenged the norm. Kirk Cousins had to do it on 2 franchise tags, and then he got Minnesota to give him a fully guaranteed contract. And in this situation, yes, he went back on the market again and ended up with the Falcons, and he got his first 2 years of his deal guaranteed. But the majority of Kirk Cousins' contracts, from the 2 franchise tags to the entire duration of the Minnesota contract, was fully guaranteed. No quarterback outside of Deshaun Watson followed his norm, followed his lead. And that's where it has to come from the agents to actually be insistent. And they would rather take fake money and fluff contracts just to impress future clients than actually take a real contract that is fully 100% guaranteed. And it has to change with the agents because the players, they don't have the lifespan to sort of endure this. Some quarterbacks do, but you see what's happening. There was Russell Wilson who came next after Kirk Cousins, and he's done 2 deals. Neither one of them were fully guaranteed. Deshaun Watson was the only quarterback who actually did it. And you know the circumstances of that. But
right. It's signing bonuses also, I think, have enabled agents and the league to get away with not guaranteeing contracts. That's different from the NBA. We're in the NFL, if you give a player a significant signing bonus, that sort of placates them and removes the impetus to demand guaranteed money.
Actually, a great point, because we don't have ridiculous signing bonuses in the NBA. But excellent point on your part. But Barry, we talked a little bit about this roster, and you asked me a question before we began the show. What was that question again, Barry?
The question was, if you had to bet a finite amount of money, let's say $10,000, that this Dolphins team would definitely be a playoff team, would you do it? I think we can both agree, and reasonable people can agree, this is a good team. But how certain can you be? And there's always the injury risk, obviously. But let's say they stay healthy. How certain can you be that this is a playoff team, knowing that there are good teams that did not make the playoffs last year, Cincinnati at the top of the list because of a quarterback injury, that is going to have to bump out one of the 7 AFC teams that did make the playoffs? That would give me pause for thought. I would not take that bet.
You're making you make me, if I had to put money on the line that whether they would or wouldn't make the playoffs, I wouldn't put that money on the line. And it's not because I do not believe that it's a talented team. It's not because I don't believe that they're one of the best AFC teams. For me, it's an injury concern. And you brought it up. Tua Tagovailoa, who's had one healthy season in his 4 previous years in the NFL. If Tua's sidelined 6 games, forget about it. That's just an easy layup right there. Then you've got the defensive line. Zach Sealer, Calais Campbell. One of those injuries are gone. Your whole defense is shot. Jalen Ramsey, Kendall Fuller. What do we know about Cam Smith? Is he ready to handle the mantle? Now you brought up the point about the Cincinnati Bengals, and I'll also include the New York Jets. That's a team that you continue to hear more and more about, especially with Aaron Rodgers coming back and being healthy. And we don't know where he is, but this team's in a desperate spot. I think their head coach and their GM is probably coaching for their lives. banking on Aaron being Aaron and carrying a franchise. But let's say that he is that quarterback. I think that they could potentially be the number one team in the AFC East, and that's not discounting Josh Allen, the Dolphins' daddy. It's I do think the Buffalo Bills have come back to the pack a little bit. However, they still got Josh Allen, and Josh Allen has lost the Miami Dolphins twice in 7 years. Right. It's he's a ridiculously talented quarterback. And assuming that they can figure out what they're going to do at the receiver position, whether it be Chase Claypool or Mac Hollins, or and I'm only mentioning the Dolphins. I know they got Shakir and they got some other more accomplished wide receivers, but they get rid of Stephon Diggs and they got to figure out what they have to do at that position. But they're still a talented roster. I would make the argument to you that the AFC East probably has the 4 best teams in the NFL. Because outside of the Patriots,
right, 3 of the 4, sure,
yeah, 3. Patriots are going to be the bottom dwellers. I think they're a team that's going to be positioning themselves for a top pick, even though they drafted their quarterback. I don't really see that much talent on that roster. A rookie coach. I think they're kind of in a rebuilding mode, like Miami Dolphins were with Brian Flores. But Jets, Aaron Rodgers is an MVP. 2 years ago? If he can regain that status, has a little bit of comfort and familiarity in the offense, gels, they established a running game. Now their running back is a second year removed from the ACL. They're a scary team. And the one thing I don't feel comfortable about the Dolphins, and we talked about this ad nauseum, and yes, they did a miraculous job of rebuilding the roster despite being in cap hell, or as I called it, the capocalypse. But if you look at this roster, they are patched up with aged 12 players over 30 on this roster. They're one of the oldest NFL teams heading into training camp. Then you got a number of players who've got injury history and injury concerns, which, every NFL team, it's 100% injury risk in the NFL. But let's just say that we have to extract 5 starters from this team by the time we get to December. 5 starters. You pick whichever 5 starters are. And yes, the Bills will probably do the same thing this year, even though they didn't really have that many injuries last season. The Jets will do the same thing. Are you comfortable extracting 5 starters from the team like last year when you lost the 2 pass rushers, Chubb and Phillips, and Xavier Howard, and then you had Javon Holland out, then you had Raheem Mostert and Jalen Waddle. There you go. We got so many Jalens. It's hard to keep track of my Jalens. Are you comfortable? If I took 5 starters, you pick the 5 starters. Are you comfortable at saying that this is still the same caliber team that they were last year?
No. And I want to preface this by saying I think Greer has done a good job this offseason. I think they've built a good roster that is a playoff contender. But I also would say this. I think there's a greater risk of them missing the playoffs and a greater chance of them advancing to the Super Bowl, which is something that I think Baltimore and Kansas City could not say. So I look at it this way. Last year's playoff teams: Baltimore, Kansas City, the Dolphins, Houston, Cleveland, Buffalo, Pittsburgh. 7 guys. So the question is, which of those 7 teams is going to be bounced if Cincinnati or the Jets or even the Jacksonville Jaguars make the playoffs? That's 1 to 3 teams that likely would not make the playoffs if those teams do. I include Jacksonville just because of a division that's winnable, and obviously Lawrence still has a ceiling he hasn't reached. I'm not even mentioning the Chargers yet, who will eventually be good under Harbaugh, but probably won't be this season. So of those teams that made the playoffs last year, Omar, you could make the case that the Texans are better after getting Diggs and some of their other moves. The Steelers are likely better, going from
better quarterback,
Russell Wilson or Fields. I would say it's a slight improvement over Pickett, whether it is Russell Wilson or Fields at quarterback. Cleveland getting Deshaun Watson back, so they'll have Watson instead of Flacco, who's very good for them, but still obviously threw a lot of picks. So what's the team that you remove from the 7 that made the playoffs last year to make room for Cincinnati if Burrow is healthy all year, to make room for the Jets if Rodgers is healthy all year, and if they can keep their very strong supporting cast, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Mike Williams, healthy, to me, that puts the Dolphins at risk. So even though I think they're a good team, they did a good job constructing this roster, if they lose 5 players and other teams stay healthy, I would say of the 7 that made the playoffs last year, I would say the Dolphins and Steelers would be the most at risk of falling out. Now, some might say Buffalo, obviously, because of losing their center, their 2 safeties, their top 2 receivers, or 2 of their top 3 with Diggs and Gabe Davis. You could make the case that Shakur had surpassed Gabe Davis last year. So some might say Buffalo. I would say Miami and Pittsburgh, the teams most at risk of being supplanted by Cincinnati or the Jets, or possibly Jacksonville. That doesn't mean I'm down on the roster. It just means that they've got to acknowledge their teams that missed the playoffs last year that are every bit as good as them, probably, or perhaps even a little bit better. And of course, obviously, one big difference with the Dolphins making it last year was Tua available for 17 games, Burrow available for only half. So that's why I would not bet anything that they're a surefire playoff team, even while acknowledging that they've done a good job putting this team together and they're a good team.
Let me
disagree with?
Let me play devil's advocate with you here. Heading into that heading into that Baltimore game, we were talking about number 1 seed, AFC East division being locked up, Tua being MVP, and then we had a rash of injuries. They were the hottest team in the NFL for 3/4 of the season, were they not? And now all of a sudden we're here. We're looking at an improved roster from the standpoint, okay, you got a better number 3 receiver in Odell Beckham Jr. Let's hope he stays healthy. You got a better tight end unit with Jonnu Smith. Let's hope he can be impactful and obviously stay healthy. I would say you've downgraded a little bit from the offensive line standpoint, losing Robert Hunt and Connor Williams. No matter who their replacements were, they are upper echelon. They were upper echelon players. Hell, Robert Hunt's $100 million offensive guard. There are very few offensive guards in the NFL history that can say they got a $100 million contract. And then Connor Williams, even though he's still out there as a free agent coming off that ACL injury, his season when healthy was chef kiss. We don't know exactly what we're going to get from the replacement center is, I forget his name.
With Aaron Brewer, exactly, who's very good as a run blocker, but obviously didn't grade out particularly well as a pass protector. And we'll see if Butch Barry can help him technique-wise with that.
Now, what I will say is I think you've upgraded a little bit at the safety. Marcus May and Jordan Poyer are probably better additions. And then you've got a healthy Javon Holland. Let's hope he stays healthy. He's playing in a contract year. You know what happens when guys are playing in a contract year, Barry. It's time to show out so we can get the money. And then I will argue that you've upgraded at inside linebacker. And then it's a wash. I'm not going to allow people to just sit here and pretend like Xavier Howard was trash. Second most interceptions in the NFL since he's been in the league in 2016, only behind Justin Simmons. And then Kendall Fuller, who struggled last year for whatever valid reasons you want to claim. You know, they traded away all of Washington's pass rushers. So no cornerback is going to really good when they've got no pass rushing. But Washington also said thanks, but no thanks on a $7 million contract for a veteran starter. I don't want to disrespect Kendall Fuller, but we don't know he's still an upper echelon starter in this league. Neither do we know if Xavier Howard's an upper echelon starter or if he can stay healthy. He's coming off that Liz Frank injury, hasn't found work. It is what it is. But can we really sit here and say maybe Fuller is more scheme diverse because he's a better zone cornerback than Xavier Howard? But is that clearly an upgrade? And from a depth standpoint, if there was one unit that I'm a little bit concerned from a talent standpoint, depth-wise, it would be cornerback.
Oh, no question about it. Cornerback is my biggest concern on the roster. Kendall Fuller's a very polarizing player. There's some who say he gave up too many completions, which he has over the years, but there are others who would say, well, those completions haven't consistently gone for long yardage. I found it interesting. Pro Football Focus ranks Kendall Fuller the 8th best cornerback in the NFL. They have Ramsey 6th. They have Fuller 8th. So Jordan Brooks, also very polarizing player. You could make the case that he's a high volume tackler. He's very active. He's in a lot of plays. He's going to put up numbers. He's going to fill the box score. But you could also make the case that he was subpar, very much so in pass coverage until last year. Last year
Yes.
was his first good year in 4 years in coverage from a metric standpoint. Cornerback, though, to get back to that, that's by far my biggest concern, because even if you assume that Ramsey and Fuller will be healthy and effective all year, and you can make the effectiveness assumption with Jalen Ramsey, obviously, your number 3 concerns me going into camp. Will Kader Kohu be the guy who allowed an 82 passer rating in his coverage area as a rookie, or will he be the guy who allowed a 133 passer rating in his coverage area last year, second worst in the league? Will Cam Smith be the player that Chris Greer viewed as a ball hawk when he drafted him in the second round, or will he be the guy that Vic Fangio could not trust and played Ethan Bonner ahead of? Then would Bonner take a step to even be in consideration for the number 3 cornerback job? Will Needham be moved back to corner in camp, where obviously he hasn't played much in a couple of years because of the Achilles injury? So will one of those 4 emerge as a number 3? Will 2 of them emerge as a number 3 and a number 4? I don't know how you can have any conviction about that. Even though we're fond of all 4 players, personally, we see obviously the upside, especially with Cam Smith. I don't see how you can sit here today and say the Dolphins have enough at number 3 and number 4 cornerback. Might they? Yes. Can you say they definitely do? Absolutely not. And that's why I think if there's any position that could be addressed in mid-August, that would be it. There are no players on the roster who need a better first 3 weeks of camp, in my view, than Cam Smith and Kader Kohu. I
can beat you. I can beat you on that one, Liam Eichenberg.
Okay. Well, hey, Jack Driscoll is walking through that door. So Driscoll is there if Liam is not very good. So, yeah, I do acknowledge guard would be a concern, especially if Isaiah Wynn doesn't stay healthy. I'd throw one other concern at you since we started talking about these, and that would be outside linebacker. If Chubb and Phillips are not back to full speed by the beginning of the season, it would be quite a reach to think that both of them would be. Then can you trust that Shaq Barrett into his 30s is going to be close to the player he was 2 or 3 years ago? That's why the Van Ginkel move bothered me. I would have gone the extra $3.5 million guaranteed, which was the difference between the Barrett guarantee and the Van Ginkel guarantee.
See, but
just
does
to
Van
be
Ginkel
a younger player to count?
But does Van Ginkel, and I love Van Ginkel, I love Gink, but does Van Ginkel fit this scheme the way that he probably would have fit Brian Flores' scheme or Vic Fangio's scheme? It's a little bit different. Van Ginkel isn't that great of an edge player, but he was such a tremendous rusher last year. And I think he sort of created a lot of his pressure from the inside linebacker spot. I agree with you from a concern standpoint. There are 3 players that I think automatically, and really 4, that I would begin training camp on the PUP from the standpoint of you get to stash them. You get an extra roster spot. You don't have to rush them onto the field. You know, it's Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, Cameron Good, and even Savon Ahmed, because Savon Ahmed didn't practice all offseason. They've got 6 running backs. Stash the guy. Let him progressively work his way back, and then maybe by the time you get to the bye, one of your running backs is injured. You know the nature of the NFL, but that's that. Let's put that over there. You're right. Shaq Barrett, Chop Robinson, Mohamed Kamara, and I'm sure they're going to find some undrafted veteran and pretend like undrafted player and pretend like he's doing a stellar job. That's just the nature of the NFL. Those 4 are going to have to hold it down until we get to the bye week. And then, hopefully we'll progressively be working Chubb and Jalen back into the equation. The one concern that I have with those guys is when Cameron Wake came back from his injury, the same Achilles injury, same as Jalen Phillips. He wasn't very good. He had a great season, but they limited his snap count, limited his workload until the midseason point. And I think that was a smart approach. This was before the era of sports science too, Barry. So why would you not take that exact same approach with both of these guys, especially when Bradley Chubb, this is his second ACL injury. And Jalen Phillips, even though he looks like a Greek god, he's got an injury history. He was selected in the first round, even though he's got a history of injuries. And you know who Mike McDaniel is. You take the cautious approach. Now, if they decide to not put them on the PUP, hey, you have more knowledge and more of a conviction than I do, but it just is the smarter approach to take because people don't understand. If you do not begin training camp with them on the PUP, they can't go on it. And so why not begin them on the PUP? If you're 2 weeks into training camp and they're ready to go, then you can take them off it. But you can carry them on the PUP up until you assemble your 53-man roster, and then they don't count against your 53-man roster. They just count against your training camp roster. So, hopefully the Dolphins take the smart approach. I think Chris Grier is smart enough to know how to play the roster games. But then again, do you listen to these players when they always arrogantly tell you, I'm ready to go?
Right. I think it's smart to place all 4 on PUP to begin camp. And Salvan Ahmad, as much as anyone on the roster, is the break glass in case of emergency player, because you don't really need him on your 53 if you presume that Chris Brooks is going to continue building on what we showed last year. There's no place for him probably on this team unless one of the running backs gets injured or unless Chris Brooks regresses from a year ago. The only thing that would give me even a little bit of peace of mind with regard to Chubb and Phillips being sidelined or limited early in the season is the fact that most of the great quarterbacks on your schedule are in the second half of the year. The Bills game in week 2 is obviously the clear exception. So you need a pass rush in that game against Josh Allen. But you see what else they're facing. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence, he might be a $255 million quarterback, but his career stats aren't that much better than Blake Bortles. So that's what you get in week 1. Obviously, with Geno Smith potentially in week 3, you're getting a guy who's pretty good, but no one who's probably going to keep you up at nights. You get Will Levis.
Oh, Geno, you're disrespecting Geno at his homecoming, Barry. You're disrespecting Geno at his homecoming.
That's totally unacceptable.
Oh, actually, it's not his homecoming. We're going up to Seattle.
Then week 5 at New England. So likely Jacoby Brissett, unless Drake May is deemed ready, but likely Brissett.
Oh, week please give me Brissett. Please give me Brissett. I would rather Brissett than a rookie quarterback.
And then week 7 at the Colts, so Anthony Richardson. So then late October, Arizona and Kyler Murray. So you could make the case that they're facing only one great quarterback before October 26th, and Josh Allen, another pretty good one, and Trevor Lawrence. So that would be the only thing that would give me a little peace of mind with regard to all the points you make about Chubb and Phillips, that even if they're back, we can't expect vintage Chubb and Phillips right away. And also, I guess the one other thing that gives us a little peace of mind is adding Calais Campbell, obviously not playing the outside linebacker position, but will give you some, assume that barring a free agent addition, Shaq Barrett's going into the season unless Jalen Phillips is able to play week 1, which I guess certainly can't be ruled out. So the question is there anyone on the roster at inside linebacker that you would like to see some snaps at outside linebacker? I know Tyndall is someone you've pretty much given up on, but obviously he showed pass rush skills at Georgia. No. He could probably make that transition.
Yeah, I definitely think Channing Tindall, I think the best thing that he can do is rush, that athleticism. I was very intrigued at that. I asked that question to Vic Fangio, considering I was like, basically, he's a bust as an inside linebacker. Do you think you can get any use of him as an outside linebacker? And Fangio was like, no. But I think if you had a coordinator who was less stubborn and less rigid, maybe he'd think outside the box. I got to admit that I did like what I saw from Channing Tindall during training camp. Where in past years he would not make a play all day. There were instances where he'd make 2 or 3 plays. And I think that you can sense that there's a young player who realizes, hey, man, they're tired of waiting on me. I either need to poop or get off the pot. Also, not just that, but I think that you can use Calais as an edge if you wanted to go that route and in special packages. And then also Jonathan Harris and then Neville Gallimore, they're 5 technique guys. You can get creative. And you could even go to a 4-3 front. You don't absolutely necessarily have to have – it really, to me, depends on how Chop Robinson and Muhammad Kamara are as edge setters. And to me, that will sort of predicate what you do and how you do it. But on that note, Barry – it was phenomenal to sit here and break it down with you in terms of where this roster is. And mind you, A lot of Dolphin fans are probably going to get in their feelings because both of us said that if we had to put 10 grand on it, we would not predict the Dolphins to make the playoffs. Now, the level of money made me a little bit more cautious than.
Yes, I might have done it at 1,000, but I got to draw the line somewhere. And again, just to remind people, we both like their team, as the Heat would say, right? It's a good roster. They've done a good job, even though they lost 3 really good players this offseason. It's more a function of the fact that you have to at least factor in the teams that didn't make the playoffs last year that should be better. Bengals, Jets, maybe Jaguars, Chargers eventually under Harbaugh, but probably not yet.
Yes, definitely. Well, that's it for the Miami Herald's Dolphins In Depth podcast. We will see you again, another episode this week.